Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has been enabled to become a mighty evil king, but whose dark ambitions were not satisfied.
Tim Longo. I don't know if I like all this Ganondorf comparison stuff that's been happening lately.
There might be more. I don't know. That could happen again, at any time.
Fair enough.
When we have 8-9 episodes about a particular game, these things tend to happen.
Yeah,
themes develop.
Run out of quotes but I get it. Yeah, this is is this our longest series? Maybe. I think so.
Oh yes. Well, it's running up against Republic Commando.
I guess, yeah. Republic Commando was a little bit of a different thing. So yeah, so we have a different format today, and something cool that we've been wanting to do for a while. So I'll introduce our guest, which we do have one today as a surprise. I'm pleased to welcome Lani Lum to the podcast. Lani is a veteran game developer, producer, and entered into the industry in 2005 as an associate producer, and worked up to producer on such games as Turok for Three Wave Software, and Ion for NCSoft. She joined Microsoft and 343 Studios in 2011 and worked up to lead producer there while working on games such as Halo 4, Halo 5, Halo Infinite, until recently moving to Xbox Game Studios over the past year or year and a half, I think, to work on Microsoft Flight Simulator, where she has recently been promoted to executive producer. Congratulations to that on the product. I've known Lani since 2013, and have come to find out that she may be a bigger geek than I am, which is a pretty hard thing to do. She is an avid MMO player and has even been a competitive CounterStrike player back in her past, as well as we used her as one of our face models for Cortana in the video game for Halo, and she would often do our VO scratch track for Cortana during production before we got the final VO in, which she was wonderful at. Some other tidbits to know about Lani that we always like to bring up, though I'm not sure she likes us to bring them up. She does know Klingon and is a uber Trekkie, and she does have a tattoo of the Triforce, I believe, on her wrist. And so when I thought about having somebody on to talk about Zelda as a series and Ocarina, she's one of the first people I thought of, because I don't think I know anybody else who has a Triforce as a tattoo. So I thought, well, Lani's a pretty big Zelda fan. And so welcome to the show, Lani.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that amazing introduction.
Of course, and that's only scratching the surface as well. But yeah, definitely congratulations. I know that the executive producer role is a fairly recent promotion, so it's well-deserved. And I know there's a lot of us that have worked with you that think that that's long overdue. So,
thanks so much.
Yeah. And so to explain what we're doing and why Lani is on, other than being an awesome producer and just development leader in general, and has shipped many games. The thing that I've been wanting to do for a while. I mean, Brett and I, we haven't, other than Republic Commando, we haven't worked on any of the games that we play for the podcast. We're just two developers talking about these classic games. And so obviously these games have impacted many other developers other than ourselves that have not worked on them. And so I don't know if we'll do this, keep doing this from time to time, but I think it's going to be fun. And basically Lani being such a big Zelda fan and hardcore and veteran just game developer in her own right, we wanted to see, her, if she had thoughts on Ocarina and just Zelda as a series in general. But Lani, one of the first things, as I mentioned to you before, that we do like to do, because the listeners like to hear kind of how developers have come up. Is there sort of a short intro, sort of like how you got into the industry that you could share with the audience?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess, I started playing games pretty young. And then, as you mentioned, I played CounterStrike competitively. And that was about the same time that I was in college studying, at the time, I think it was environmental sciences and anthropology. While, incredibly interesting, I admittedly was not very focused on, because I was playing CounterStrike almost 8 hours a day, sometimes more.
Holy cow. It's so funny how many stories we have of college being the years when people tend to do that, and all of us. And so,
that's funny. My son plays CounterStrike. Well, I guess it's Go or whatever now, and I will have to point this particular episode out to him because I don't think he listens, but he might be interested now.
It's such a funny. I mean, I've tried playing Counter-Strike recently, and there's a lot of muscle memory there. Like when I'm gonna, purchase my equipment or buying, everything is still there, but my sense of, my twitch reaction, my aim is just deteriorated beyond beyond anything. So when I started in college, I was playing like 8 or 12 hours a day. That was, I think, Counter-Strike 1.5. So it was a long time ago. And I wasn't doing very well in school, and it was my mom actually. And I guess I kind of have a different story. Most people's parents are like, don't play video games. And my mom was like, why are you studying anthropology? Like, that's great, but
wow,
you spend all your time playing video games. You should probably go study video games.
Holy cow, that is such an opposite. That's so cool to hear. Yeah.
She's a cool lady. She was the one that introduced me to my first console, and so I switched over to study video game art and design, and then I originally started making design was kind of where I was heading, and wanted to make maps for first-person shooters, which kind of married into my love of Counter-Strike. I wanted to do that, and then I was working with a small group of folks, and we actually we got our first paid job to make a map, and none of us. We didn't have a producer. We didn't have anybody organizing, and none of us wanted to do it. That sounded terrible. But I literally drew the short straw, like literally, and that's how I became a producer.
Wow!
And I just never went back.
So you took one for the team and basically held everything together as you always and currently do.
Thanks. Yeah. It was someone's got to do this, and
right.
I was not happy about it. But I found, after doing it, I found like, oh, actually, this is something I really enjoy. I wanted to keep pursuing.
Yeah, that was my next question, is sort of like how, what those early years of transitioning to kind of mentally to what production is and its importance. Because again, I mean, I'm not trying to, toot your horn here, but I just feel like, as far as production goes, you're one of the best I've worked with. And so it's interesting to hear the short straw story, which I had never heard before. And it was like, well, wow, because it seems like you've been a natural. So what about production in those early years? Did you just keep doing it because of the short straw, or was there something that kind of,
Yeah, did you keep drawing the short straw?
I know, right? No, I mean, I at first
I had no talent for straw picking, and
well, it's a few things. I drew the short straw, and begrudgingly was like, okay, I'll do this, but actually started to enjoy it, and I also realized once I got into the world of the gaming industry that I sounds terrible, but I was just like, I'm actually not that good. Like, I'm not that great of a designer, and I'm not that great of an artist, and there's just so much incredible talent out there, and so this gave me a way to an opportunity to work with all those incredibly talented people in those different disciplines. And I liked just being in a position where I could engage with folks, on the publishing side, or reaching out to third parties, that were making audio for us. And I just really liked being able to do a lot of different things, and working with all the teams within the studio. So I think that I wasn't happy about it first, but it evolved into something that I just really enjoy, and even to this day, I can't really imagine doing anything else.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, and as I mentioned to you, I think over email before the podcast, we haven't had, we really need to have more producers on. We've had a handful over the, almost 5 years that we've been doing this. And every time we have one on, it's just such a great different perspective on game development, because obviously we've had a lot of creative direction or design folks on, because we tend to try to get people who have sort of been at the origin of these ideas for these games if we can. But we've had other disciplines as well. But production, I think, is definitely an unsung hero of game development. And I think I totally agree with you. One of the things I've actually been jealous of producers myself, and I think I've joked with you before, is that I think, production is where I'd like to go someday, I feel like, because I have so much respect for people who can keep things on the tracks. But I think that concept of producers touching every aspect of the game is very unique to that discipline and very cool. And especially, I'm sure, as an EP, that's in a whole nother level that you're finding out now. So, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So moving to, thank you for that sort of intro for yourself. Moving to, I guess, early Lani as an early gamer, because we want to talk about Legend of Zelda. And, maybe not that we have to dwell on it, but maybe kind of building up to how does one come to the point where they want to get the Triforce put on their as a tattoo?
Tattooed on their body.
I was wondering if that first console was maybe a Nintendo console that your mother introduced you to.
Yeah, it was. She bought me an NES, and there were a few games that I played that I think that I enjoyed, or that I got really frustrated over. One that comes to mind is like the Karate Kid. I remember I loved that game so much. Or Indiana Jones, which I could never get past like the second level. But then my mom bought me Legend of Zelda, and the first thing that intrigued me about it was, this is a game about a girl? Like, that was kind of my reaction. Like, she was telling me about Zelda, and Zelda's this princess. And so I actually went into playing the game thinking Link was Zelda. Like, I thought I was playing a girl for the majority of the game.
Right. Yeah.
And unlike the other games that I had played, which again, I had fun and kind of dabbled in, I really there wasn't the sense of immersion and connection that I had, because I wasn't playing a female character, and I really identified with this little green girl on the screen. So I think that, I played that. It really opened my eyes to, video games being something for girls, especially when I was growing up. It kind of took a turn where most of the games were marketed towards, or at least from my perspective, it was marketed towards boys. Most of, my girlfriends did not play video games, or if they did, it was just kind of like something they dabbled in, if it was family game night or something. That was, again, just my experience, and it wasn't until I think around the time I was about to finish the game that I realized that Link was a boy. It was the Zelda was the princess, not the character I was playing, and that really disappointed me. But I was but just the impact that it had on me was huge, and it kind of sparked my love for playing video games, and that's something I've pretty much done ever since.
Yeah, you had never told me, you'd given me a hint of that story when we were talking about doing the episode, and you'd never told me that story before. And I think it's obviously a revelation to some degree there of the possibilities of games. And I agree, we've talked about it on the podcast, because a lot of the games we play are in these, these earlier eras, and you're completely right as far as the representation in marketing and the goals in marketing for that era. It definitely 18 to 34 males was like, right. That's the goal. Right. And I'm not, I'm not even going to, dance around that. That's just, and I was in those conversations, and it's like, really, that's how this works. Yeah. But that was the norm. And I think it's a profound for you to get this game, regardless of the reality of what it actually was about. And to have that moment when you told me that, I just was blown away at the, the possibilities there, and how that probably did have such a big influence. And kind of, it also continues to bum me out with the series in general, because there's been it's been 30 plus years of this series, and still I think that they haven't handled female protagonists as well. So it's, it's still a bummer that it's like it started that way and it's not actually progressed as much as I think it should. But
that's also when the shift started happening, is around that time, because honestly, we've never really talked about it, but there's a lot of things that tie into it, but it was in part because programming was pitched to men as a career at that time, and so it kind of bled, and so it sort of started in my neck of the woods as far as that goes, but also then I think as the games got more graphically powerful and had to represent more specific and less sort of blobby or abstract characters, they had to be something specific, and then all those things kind of all went together. So that's just kind of a historical aside, but it's unfortunate that it was that way.
Yeah, I think about what could have been. Another example, and this is kind of an aside, but with CounterStrike, I would play, most of the folks that I played with, I actually played with the very first fully sponsored female CounterStrike team. So I was very fortunate to play with a group of women who were like just as passionate about video games and CounterStrike. But when we would go to a tournament or, a LAN tournament or whatnot, when you had to haul like your computer and carry it, the giant monitor, CRT monitor into wherever you were, it was
CRT.
It was mostly like, it was 98% male, maybe 99. Like it was all men, and it was difficult for us to get other females interested in a CounterStrike until there was a skin pack that came out that made the arm that you see holding your weapon a female arm. And I remember just applying that skin to the game, and I had some of my girlfriends over, and they were immediately interested in what I was playing. They were like, "What's that? Like, can I give it a try?" And it was just something so simple that just kind of opened up to an audience that otherwise would have been like, I really do not want to play a game with this big muscular hairy man arm. So
yeah.
I mean, to be fair, neither do I, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah. There's a whole other podcast we could do on just this topic of which is unfortunate. Yeah, but I love the genesis of this for you with Zelda, and especially now knowing that your mom got you the console and kind of the history there. Yeah. So what brought you? So were there things before we go to Ocarina? Were there things in the original Zelda that you remember? So you mentioned the immersion, especially from a character, sort of recognizability perspective and seeing yourself in the character, or at least a girl in the character. What were there things about the original Zelda, compared to Karate Kid or Indiana Jones that spoke to you for the way the game was designed or made?
Well, I think it made, for the way my brain works, I guess it made sense. The specifically, the dungeons or the temples, like those, just how it's structured and how, okay, I have this objective, I need to get all these pieces to do this, I need to go here. It was, and maybe that's also my producer brain.
I was going to say, I'm seeing Gantt charts in your future.
I know, it was very compartmentalized, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I see the path to the finish line, and this is how I'm going to approach it. And just discovering new different bosses and different ways of approaching that. Like it was different from other games that I played, which again were very fun, but were a little bit more linear. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like Zelda is still linear, but it felt different. It was like a different approach than I had experienced before.
Yeah, you have to plan, right? It's not just I react to the one thing you put in front of me, in a karate game or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, you're making your own decisions about where to go next, and even like you said, even though there is some sense of linearity that arguably a lot of people describe the original Zelda as sort of one of the first open world games in a way, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can make plans and there's a checklist, right? There's quests, if you will, and things like that. Yeah. So that makes sense. Because it definitely stood out at the time, for sure. So what kept you coming back to the series, do you think? I mean, did you play Link to the Past then, moving forward, I assume, or did you have a SNES, or did you skip that one, or what was the next?
I did. I did have a Super Nintendo. I had GameCube. I've had all of them, and it's funny because I think it was like yesterday I wanted to take a look at the map of all of the games and to see like what have I just to see. I'm like, I think I've played all of them, and then I was like, holy cow, I have not played all of them. Like there are a lot I have missed apparently, or I don't have like a profound recollection of. I think that the thing that kept coming back for me was it feels like it's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, their daughter, who's around 10 or 11 years old, and she was talking about Harry Potter and how it's just something so ingrained in her childhood and is comforting and just kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling. It brings her back to like these really good memories. And I think that's what Zelda is for me. And every time I go back to a Zelda game or, whether it's replaying or if it's something new like Breath of the Wild, it's just, I instantly have this feeling of familiarity, of comfort, and of childhood. Like that comes back. And so I think to me that's the reason I had it tattooed on my body for life, is that it just had such a profound influence on my life, and it's the reason I work in the video game industry today.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I love that. Yeah. I mean, the Brett and I, when we started the Ocarina series, one of I think the reasons we were excited to sort of riff off of what you were just saying, how you describe it for yourself. One of the reasons we were excited to play it around the holidays is because we wanted something that was warm and fuzzy, and something. I think I don't remember if we've said it this way in the series thus far, but it's a game you can trust. You can go into it and feel that they're going to take care of you, and you're just going to be able to, like you said, have that sort of familiar, fun, warm kind of experience, and you can trust that will be the case, and you not worry. You know what I mean? Because they respect the player, and it's well designed, and all of the signaling and telegraphing is there, and it just feels, like you said, warm and fuzzy, and that's awesome.
And there's a sense of when you meet somebody who loves the franchise as much as you do, or has played through at this point way more games than I have, you start it's one of those game franchises where you talk about it and there's so much debate, and there's so many things that someone recently told me about, something happening in this game that affected that one. And it just, blows my mind. Like I had no idea. And then trying to keep track of the timelines, and it's just such a, I could talk about it for hours really, if start going into talking about the lore and the connections between the games.
Yeah. Which, we did a little bit of that, and
yes.
you know that I love that stuff too, and so and it's a great series for that, because I think the backdrop of Hyrule and the characters and the returning to characters, I think, is another critical part, right? Because you have these sort of like this legacy of these characters that come back time and time again, whether it's through sort of their ancestry or just returning from a thematic perspective. And so it's, there is always something to talk about. And for the people who love the series, there's common topics to talk about, right? You can quickly, almost like, even if you don't know the person very well, you can quickly connect, on Zelda topics and jump right in. So that's why I thought it would be fun to get someone like you on the podcast, because I knew that we could jump into those in the same way, into the series. Yeah. So moving, one of the things we talked a lot about with the series was the move to 3D. And you have, with you, some pretty profound memories and connection with the 2D games, especially the first one. Do you have memory of getting your N64? Was this one of the first games you got when it? Well, I don't actually remember if it was a launch title, but so tell us about this.
Definitely, this was a much delayed title at the time. It didn't come out until 98.
That's what
November
that's what I remember.
98.
Yeah.
She remembers the
November 23rd.
Oh, okay. There we go.
I remember because I got it right before Thanksgiving. So, or around Thanksgiving.
Right.
But it was it's, I mean, Probably the moment that kind of blew my mind was just I guess Hyrule Field. Like I just remember
Yeah.
like stepping on there and just kind of being blown away, like really blown away. What is this? Like, what do I do now? And it's something that is like, I actually wonder if there's something today that kids experience that they'll have the same, or was that the magic? You know, like it was such a magical moment, I think, for, you know, the folks having playing 2D games for so long and then kind of going into not just 3D, but like this really open world, Nintendo being so ahead of their time. I mean, in terms of an open world game, I didn't even know I wanted an open world game until I kind of experienced that. So for me, that was the moment. Like just mind blown.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that too in the series, and the importance of Hyrule Field specifically, and Hyrule Field becoming a model that other games would emulate or copy or riff off of, you know, and it changed the industry, I think, in pretty profound way. But yeah, I'm not surprised that was kind of that aha moment for sure. You know, it's a good question about kids experiencing that today. There's probably examples that us oldsters can't really think of, you know, per se. And I don't know how close your kids are to being gamers, or if they're gamers or what. So maybe you have some personal stories. One that I would pull out though, even though our daughter's not too much of a gamer, but she did go through a phase where we would play together. Minecraft is one example for me where I feel like there's some of that revelation, you know, for kids today. It's not the open world because that's common and they've kind of grown accustomed to that. But the concept of manipulating every bit of the world, you know, it's like, what? I can, you know, so I'm just trying to think of an equivalent of sort of that aha. But yeah, I mean, moving to 3D for me with Ocarina was, you know, seeing the formula translated, but in a cinematic way, I guess, you know, coming, like you said, coming through into that Hyrule Field for the first time and seeing it in a, you know, just seeing the sky, you know, and the horizon and the landmarks and stuff, pretty profound.
So it really was.
So once, okay, so you're on Hyrule Field and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? How did, you know, when it comes down to translating it from 2D, because being a Zelda fan at that point, do you have memories of sort of some of those early, you know, combat or like finding the castle or finding landmarks or finding the temple, you know, finishing a boss, you know, those sorts of things from a 2D to 3D perspective?
Well, I think I still have this feeling today when I play open world games where it's kind of this exciting feeling of being like overwhelmed and at the same time intense anxiety, because it's just like, where do I go? Where do I start? What do I do? So I think a very distinct memory I have is I was not a natural with the camera controls. It took me some time to get used to. So I remember that distinctly being a really big challenge for me and something I had I really had to overcome before I could enjoy the game. Which again, like it blows. My son is 4 years old and just finished playing Bug Snacks, and it blows my mind at 4 years old how well he controls like the camera and the movement. And so I remember it being like, you know, 1998 and I was a teenager and struggling with it.
Yeah. Well, and they, you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about on the series too, and in actually on the podcast often, because we're often playing a lot of the games that were that were either being translated to 3D or were, you know, originally coming to 3D, and cameras at that time were a frontier. 3D cameras anyway, right? So, I mean, Nintendo was trying to figure it out too. And so, and I actually think in Ocarina specifically, they progressed the medium forward with their camera, and they hit a lot of more positives than negatives, but they didn't quite get it, you know, quite yet. So I think it's hard for anyone.
I don't think they really had the controller to get it quite right.
No,
I mean, that's something we talk about a lot, right? Is that the hardware really drives a lot of their decisions, and I don't think they quite had the right hardware. In fact, I would not be surprised to learn that that's part of why this game was delayed. If we ever got somebody on about that, because it is a little less approachable from that standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Do you have any sort of favorite memories of once you get the handle, once you get the hang of, of the controls a little bit, and you're kind of getting your bearings, and you're like, oh, here's the castle. You mentioned the map earlier, and looking back at the maps of the games to kind of jog your memory. Yeah. Looking at the overland map for Ocarina, and as is often the case for any of the Zelda games, they typically have a very similar layout, to all of the games, because they want Hyrule to feel like this persistent place in a way. So do you remember kind of once you got your bearings in the 3D perspective, were some of those revelations happening? Like you see where the castle is, you see where, Mount Doom is, things like that, or Death Mountain.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like that sense of just, talking about Zelda, from my childhood, being able to kind of plot out what I was going to do, and having that, the security of knowing that there is going to be dungeons that I'm going to be going through, or temples. I know some people get very mad when you say dungeons. But I think that, there was just a lot, in terms of that, overcoming that feeling of just, this is so big and I don't really know what to do. And just taking the time to plot out based on, having played other games. But it's when I think back on, it's been like a few decades now since I've played this game. Like I said, I actually pulled out the N64, and my intention was to play through it as much as I could before coming on to your show.
Yeah, that's a bold statement.
Yeah, well,
yes, we had 7 primary episodes just playing through the game. So, if it over the course of 7 weeks, almost 2 months of playing this game. So
thank you for attempting it, though.
Well, I set it up, and my daughter immediately took it from me, so she's playing.
Oh, is she? So yeah, you mentioned that earlier. So tell us about that. That's awesome. So what did she? Obviously you haven't probably grilled her or talked to her about it too much. But what did she? Why did she jump? Do you think jump right into it? And was there something about? Is she a Zelda fan, or did she just see it and thought that looked interesting? She's played Breath of the Wild, so she is. Oh, wow!
That's all she's played. I've tried showing her.
Noob.
I've tried playing. Yeah, right. No, we tried playing Zelda on the NES with her, and she was just not having it. Like, she's not interested in the NES whatsoever. So even Mario. She plays it, but she's like, okay, I want to move on to something else now. But she can't go back. She can't go back. But because she liked Breath of the Wild so much, and I was telling her about Ocarina of Time and what it meant to me, and the music. Like, just, we listened to the music a lot, so she was familiar with the music. So I'll be playing it in the house, if I'm cleaning or if we're doing something, and she was like, I know that song, and you play the Ocarina of Time soundtrack as a cleaning the house backdrop. That's amazing. It is an amazing. I forgot until we played how good the music is. It's so good. Yeah. It's and I'll just find myself like humming, Zelda's Lullaby, or
Alexa, play Kondo mixtape.
It's so seeing her, that was the first thing. She's like, I know that song, and watching her play through it, there's parts that she's frustrated. It's funny watching, like, someone who's grown up with this generation of games going back and playing, and that she's such a critic. Like, why didn't they just do this? Oh man, they're all critics. That is amazing that she has played Breath of the Wild. That's quite a game to sink into. She is, just a quick brag about my daughter. She's 8 years old. And she is a pretty phenomenal gamer for her age. She loves like Roblox and Minecraft. But one of my favorite memories with her is, watching her playing Mario Odyssey, and, she finished it, and I remember she put down the controller and she looked at me and she's like, I don't think I'll ever play a more perfect game.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So I was like, all right, I quit then. There's no point.
Yeah, there's no point to continue.
No.
Luckily, I know her a little bit, and so it's fun for me to think of her doing that and seeing her do that. That's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So much
When my kids were 8, I think they were 6 and 8 when we played Double Dash on the GameCube, the Mario Kart. And one of my sons was pretty good, and he said, "I'm almost a professional GameCube player." That was his comment at the time. So that was their entry into games. That was Mario Kart.
Love
I love it.
Because we could play together, right? We could hot seat who was driving and all that
Yeah.
stuff. When they have that revelation about themselves that they're, that's great. So even though the console was stolen from you, if you do go back into memory banks, and kind of like talking about sort of favorite moments, or things that stood out to you when you look back, obviously Hyrule Field being one of them, but were there other aspects that and I guess the music is one important one that we talked a lot about, because they infuse the music into the sort of lock and key mechanisms of the world because of the ocarina itself, which is brilliant. So anyway, what were some other memories that you had, favorite memories of the game?
I think I loved how each dungeon really had its own almost personality. Like they were, I remember that. And I mean, I could be remembering wrong, so maybe they are all the same and I was just
you're completely
in my mind.
Okay. You're completely right.
Yeah. I just remember just being like, oh, this is new and this is exciting. And that sense of just discovery, new, taking kind of the same game mechanic, but making it different. It's funny when I think back on memories, like the music emotionally, the music is a huge one for me. And again, like still something that's part of my life today that I listen to. But I think back on, the mechanics of the game and stuff like the camera controls or the context control system, like being able to, which is something I'm actually dealing right now with on Flight Simulator as we port to the console. And taking, on the PC, we have like 1,500 controls to have a gamepad. So it's, I remember that. Like, I remember that being different too. And so there's the emotional parts to the game that I remember, the dungeons, the music, seeing Zelda again, and then there are kind of more the mechanical things that really stood out to me as just like, oh, this feels like it's a game changer. Like this is something that's gonna, games will never be the same after this. Yeah,
the contextual movement stuff for sure. And it's funny because I do still consider it the first big sort of leap forward, because I think it's flawed still in some ways, of course, but that still has some frustration. So it'd be interesting to have your daughter on sometime, and we can ask her some of her thoughts on, not that we would do that, but it's because she, that's a unique perspective of playing Breath of the Wild and then going backwards, like you said, and like, why did they do this? Or why wouldn't they just do this? Because they're definitely a lot of whenever on the podcast, right. For the whole point of this podcast is we go backwards, and there's often those discussions of like, they didn't know, we didn't know back then, we didn't know what the solution was, and we have it now. So it's a fun kind of weird time traveling problem.
It is. And if you try to like, she, has a whiteboard by her desk now since she's schooling at home. And, I was trying to draw out the timeline for her. Like, I'm like, okay, so here's Ocarina of Time. Like there's a bunch of games before that, but here's Ocarina of Time. And then it splits into like the adult, the child, A Link to the Past. Like I'm trying to, and she is so, she's just like, okay, but does it matter in which order I play them? I'm like, not really. And she's like, that's all I need to know. Like, she's like, Mom, you're going way too deep. I don't.
Love it. Oh my God, I love it, because that's exactly if our daughter cared, I would be doing the same thing. Like, listen here, and I tried, and Brett doesn't care about this stuff.
With me, it would be exactly the opposite. My kids would be like, so here's Ocarina, and then before this is this, but then these things, and it splits. And I'd be like, can I have a controller?
Right, exactly. She was not interested. She's just like, this is great, but I mean, I just want to play the game.
Yeah.
But she had a lot of questions about, and it's something that made me think about it too. She's just like, how come it feels like Link is meeting Zelda for the first time again? Like, does he not know her? Is Link the same Link in every game? And
Now we're getting to it.
yeah. And when you kind of play them all, you just know. But then I was trying to explain it to her, and I was like, oh wow, I'm not doing a great job of explaining. It sounds very convoluted.
That's because it is.
Great questions. Yeah, it is. It's very complicated.
It is when you put it on a timeline like they did eventually, and as you attempted to kind of explain, one of the one of the topics that we kind of talk about, and we talked about this with the Link to the Past when we played that as well, is I've always appreciated the perspective, even though there is a timeline. I've always loved the perspective of the series, each game in the series being more of sort of like a legend, literally a legend, as it is in the title, that's sort of like around the campfire, somebody's telling their version of the Legend of Zelda, and that they're not explicitly on a timeline, that it's just sort of like another interpretation of the legend, that somebody's even just, verbally sharing. That's how I used to justify it in my head until I knew they had a timeline. And then you look at the timeline and you're like, holy cow, that's insane. I think you did have the right answer to her that, ultimately you don't necessarily need to know. Each game, has its own kind of thing going on. So
but I mean, it takes an 8-year-old to just point out, like, she's like, wait a second, Ganon returns? And he's revived here. Wait, you defeated? Like, she's just trying to figure that all out. But it's, I mean, I think that's another reason why I love this series. Like, it is just it's complicated, and there's so many different parts to it that when you do dive into discussion, everyone kind of has their own opinion and theories. I recently, and you probably are aware of this, like someone had recently told me that Link from Ocarina of Time goes back to his village and turns back into a skeleton because ultimately he has no fairy and it has no home. And I remember just being like, what? Like, that blew my mind. So there's so many fun things that come up.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I guess, yeah. So I guess that would technically be true. And if that's the case with I'm going way deep.
Here we go.
You probably won't remember, but there's the son of the carpenter who we find is kind of in a ghoulish kind of state. You find him in both timelines, and ultimately he ends up in the Lost Woods, and he's part of the Bigoron Sword quest line.
Yeah.
But then when you go back to the Lost Woods to see him a second time, there's a fairy, there's a villager from the town, from the Kokoriko village, and she says he has gone to become a skeleton. And so I'm thinking, oh, so it's a similar situation. And to your point, like, I don't know if you remember this, Lani, because it's been a long time, but I forgot to mention this, Brett, last episode, because we talked about the ending. There's that moment where Navi leaves Link and goes up into the window in the cathedral.
Because they made such a big deal about him getting a fairy.
Yeah.
It's really wild that he loses it. Yeah. I didn't remark on that. I mean, in the moment when I was playing, I was like, oh yeah, this is a big deal. But by the time I got around to recording the cast, I'd forgotten all about it.
Yeah, and
that's the impact of lore on me.
Yeah, right, exactly. Your heart, you have no heart, so you're dead inside. But
that's why I like Kingdom Hearts, because it's all about the Heartless and the
Yeah, exactly. Great. Keep going. Only like 40 more games to play, but so in retrospect, Brett, when I mentioned last episode that I got teary-eyed, I actually forgot that was the moment, the specific moment where I started to, because you see Link standing down, down there, and he's a kid now because he's put the Master Sword back, in its place. And then he's looking up, and I'm getting teary-eyed right now talking about it. And it's just, but it to your point, Lani, like you have such a connection, people have such a connection with the series, they can do stuff like that, and it has an impact, because you have a history. Everyone has a personal history with the series. And that's a pretty special, unique thing. And it's deserving of a tattoo, I think.
I think so. Yeah. I once was at an E3, gosh, I don't remember which E3 it was, but I was when I was at NC Soft and I was working our booth, and Nintendo was showing something. I can't even remember what it was, but the lineup was so long to get into to
like
play
the
this.
DS or something.
I think you're right. Like it was 2010 probably. 2010. Yeah. And and I only had like a 20-minute break, and I was like, wow, I'm not going to be able to wait.
I see where this is going.
Yeah. So I rushed up to the front of the line, and I was just like, can I please play? Like, you have no idea how much this means to me. Like, and I'm not going to get a chance because I'm working every hour that E3 is on. And they're like, no, sorry. Like, there's this huge line. And I was like, but I have the Triforce, the symbol of Hyrule tattooed on my body. And I showed it to him, and he was like, I mean, I think he was like some, marketing person who really didn't care. Like, he was just like, cool, get to the back of the line. And what I thought was amazing was just there was all of these fans, of course, like hardcore Zelda fans that were around me, and they were like, what? Put her at the front of the line. Like, she has a tattoo on her body. And they and he was like, oh, okay. And they were like, oh my God, yes, we understand. Like, you need to play.
Holy cow.
But it was just such an incredible moment for me. It was just
That's amazing. I didn't think that was going to go that way. That the fans in the line were the ones that actually.
Yeah, and they all. I was going to say they all hold up their hands, and they've all.
Yes.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, your tattoo it's on your wrist, right? As I recall.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not on the back of your hand like it is in the game. So you didn't quite go that. Yeah. That would have been a bridge too far. It's in a nice, nice discreet spot, so you can reveal it through your sleeve if you want to, and when you need to get to the front of a line. That's amazing.
That was probably the 3DS, actually, now that I think about it, because the DS my kids had like 2006 or 7 or whatever.
They're various.
For such a moment, you think I would have remembered, but I think I was. But wow, it was just
the moment you remembered is actually, I think, the moment, which
the moment, yeah.
Like everybody else going, yeah, look, she's the hero of time. You got to let her.
Well, and I had tears in my eyes. Like, I was very convincing. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to be too sort of like touchy-feely about it, but I think that, again, that goes back to the sort of like the spirit of the franchise, and I think how people are really engaged with it. Not just
it's genuine. It's not cynical, right? It's
not
naive, or innocent, I guess is the better way to say that. Not naive, but innocent, right? There's something about it.
Yeah, it's
why I appreciate playing the games, even though I don't care about the lore. What I do appreciate is just how genuine and heartfelt they are.
And I think unfortunately it's a rare thing in the industry, in the medium, that this kind of like heartfelt and just very kind and thematically, there definitely big things happen and they're very mythological, but gosh, games, man, there's so much darkness, and so and Nintendo, luckily in general, Nintendo does this. But with Zelda specifically, I think for me, that's the one that's always stood out, as the most heartfelt.
It's the positive side of the things that we talk about with Nintendo that we have problems with, where their gender politics are also very narrow, for example, or what have you. This is at least the positive side of that, is that they keep it very innocent and pure, even if that bakes in some other assumptions that maybe we wouldn't like to see. So
yeah. Well, I mean, and so one of the, maybe we can start closing down, but I think one question that is it's a bit maybe a bit hard to answer. So I totally understand if you want to move on, but I think from a developer's perspective, and you mentioned Zelda's impact on you as a player and as a person, and just kind of like on your life trajectory being a big influence. Now that you're running projects and you're doing the things you're doing now, is there anything about Zelda, even if it's just about Nintendo in general, or the way that none of us really know how they make games. We get tidbits here and there, from and we wish we knew, and we wish we had more information. But is there your perception about how Zelda has impacted you as a developer? Is there anything from that angle that you can think of that might be interesting to talk about?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a huge question, because it's you're right. Like, there isn't really much in terms of like, how do you guys make these games, or what goes into building them. But I've read a lot of interviews or watched interviews with the developers, and I listen to the types of questions that they ask themselves, when they're making a game.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself has just taught me a lot about like, I'm not a designer, but and not an artist, but it's the questions that I feel like I will bring to the table, as a producer when we're having those discussions. I mean, I remember just, when we were working on Halo 5, for example, and we'd be in narrative discussions, and I would think about those interviews, like, what would they ask themselves? Like, they would ask, if I was, when it comes down to like, how would this character move? What is it? Really just building like all of these solid use cases and user stories, which I think is common practice probably in game development today. But I mean, I think that they were, again, so ahead of their time when they were building it, through the 80s and 90s. Those were the questions they asked themselves, and I don't know if that was kind of a best practice across the industry.
No,
it was not.
No.
We can definitively say it was not.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. I think I think you nailed it. And I think, to your point about even just reading the interviews, because we all kind of gobble up any tidbits that we can, because they are so closed-lipped about things. And we all read those interviews, and we all kind of hear like how Miyamoto comes at a problem or whatever, and those tidbits end up being these sort of gems that we extrapolate across the rest of at least Western development and just cling to. And you're totally right, because you're the person that would keep me on track. You know what I mean? And you were the person that would ask me those questions and us those questions. Yeah. And that's not easy to do. And so
those are some of my favorite meetings.
That's good. Meetings. That's good. I mean, it was, we had good dynamics going on, but I think again, I'm not trying to to toot your horn on this, but I think that you clearly were learning some of those lessons from that side of things, because that was that's what you are good at, is asking the hard questions, keeping people on track, and making sure that they're honest, that we are honest with what we're actually doing, and that we do have the right answers. Because I think production, that's one of the critical aspects of production, it's an intangible side of it. You know what I mean? It's not like a spreadsheet or a budget that is very mathematical. It's like, how do you manage a team? How do you get a team to go through a process and come out the other side with answers?
Right.
It's a lot of influence and not a lot of, control and stuff and such, so.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, that's a great answer. I think that's totally nails how a company like Nintendo and sort of through that, how Zelda can influence us as developers.
Yeah.
So cool. Well,
I have a final.
You have a final question.
Yeah.
A surprise question. Okay.
Yeah. If we set aside the particulars of it in Ocarina, of gender and questions of good and evil, there are 3 characters who bear the Triforce pieces of power, courage, and wisdom. And we have here represented 3 areas of game development in technology, production, and let's say, creativity, design. Which of those correspond, do you think, between those three, to the pieces of the Triforce?
Wow. That's a deep.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So you asking like taking power, wisdom, courage?
Tech, design and production, mapping it onto power, courage, and wisdom. I mean, I'm saying we are the Triforce here, the three of us, but which parts of that do we take up?
I think, like, just going with my gut reaction here, I'm going to put design and courage together, because I think there are a lot of design choices that require courage, either to actually implement them or to go out on a limb and convince the rest of your team that this is something we should do. I've been in tons of meetings where an idea not necessarily has been shot down, but it's been like, I don't know. And then there's, if there's that designer that's going to just keep pushing it and be like, no, I have a vision, like this is going to work. You have to believe me. Like it's, I think it takes a lot of courage. I think when it comes to power, I would map that to development, to programming, coding. None of that is possible without the power of those engineers. I mean, especially working on flight sim right now, like I am absolutely blown away by what programmers can do. Like it just, it blows my mind. And there's so much just that the power to be able to give those experiences to folks. And then wisdom, I suppose, would go to production. I don't know. I think that would just be I'm sure I could map it to any of those disciplines if I think about it, but that's kind of my gut reaction.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's not the right answer, but that's a good answer. I'm kidding. What
would your answer be?
I actually, I have it in a different order. I have wisdom as design. I have courage as tech, and I have power as production.
Interesting.
But I don't need to go into that further at the point. But like for me, I think of my job as facing down an implacable beast, right? Who can't be reasoned with, except by ones and zeros, right? I mean, that you have to take the normal way of human thought and just turn it into this other thing. And that wisdom is sort of like carrying forward the confidence of, you describe that as courage. And I think of it as sort of the forward thinking of like, knowing where we're going to end up, like, pointing in the right direction. And then production actually gets us everything we need to actually get it done for me. Right. And that to me is the power. But those are different lenses on those three things, right? So, I mean, I don't, like, I was kidding. I don't think that there's a right answer, but that was the answer I had. So I think it's amazing that you had a different one. I was like, she's totally going to go my way on this, right?
Complete opposite.
No match, not a single match.
Not one.
And meanwhile, so now I can just map out Tim's. Then must be. Anyway, thank you for taking a stab at that. Off the top of your head, you had a very good answer.
Yeah, that was excellent. I don't know. Being able to go last gives me an advantage because I've heard both of your perspectives on it, and I think. Lani and Brett know this about me, that I definitely get a little cheesy and touchy-feely at times. And I think the coolest thing about this series and the concept of the Triforce, and that it is this thing they keep coming back to, is that those three concepts are so transferable to a lot of different perspectives, and I feel like even within the games, they often change sometimes what they're usually mapped to the same characters or similar characters, but they do have a different perspective based on the story in that particular one. So I'm totally stretching this metaphor way too far, but I think I love that both of you had different approaches to it. And I would like to think that if I speak selfishly and think about my discipline, I would like to think that we are courageous. I think that we need to be more courageous and are often not taking on that mantle. So, from your perspective, Lani, I would say challenge accepted. It's like, yes, that's a good point. That's a really good way to put it. It's a good, and I think your gut reaction is actually the most important one anyway. So as far as your answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think courage is definitely needed by all three disciplines, though, for sure. And so that's why it's hard to answer. But I think Lani has convinced me. I probably would have been close to Brett's answer from a logic perspective, but I think Lani's passion has convinced me that might be the better approach. Because I don't think I would do the third choice, which is not be the
Tim, the real answer is that we're all three.
Yeah, right. Well, that was my sort of long.
But I phrased the question in such a way as to make that not the apparent answer. No,
No, I know.
I'm just riffing now.
Well, but that was my long-winded, touchy-feely version of what I was kind of trying to say. Right, is that it can change and you need all three really to succeed. But that's sort of the point. Again, not to super go too detailed about this, but that's the sort of point of the Triforce, right? Is that they're all interconnected. You need all three of them for anything to work. And Lani has immortalized that on her wrist, so she better live by it. Well,
it's a good way to get into Nintendo events.
At the very least, I can cut to the front of the line.
I am so delighted by that story because I had never heard that one. So that's amazing. So as we talked about in pre-show, one of the things we definitely want guests to have an opportunity to mention before we close down is plugging anything that they're working on or things coming up or what have you. So you have a few things you wanted to mention.
Yeah. So I've been working on Flight Sim for a while now, and we launched in the summer, so in August. And it's probably been one of the most exciting and challenging games I've worked on, just in terms of just how much goes into it and the complexity of it. And it's a very different community than what I've been on Halo for 8 years before that. So different community, different expectations. So just so much, quite a bit of a challenge, but very rewarding. So we shipped in the summer, and we actually just ported to we released our VR version on the 22nd of December, so that's available for folks to play now.
Nice.
And it really is just kind of for everyone I've talked to, once you play Flight Sim in VR, it's kind of like there's no going back. This is the way it was intended to play. And then, of course, we are going to be porting over to the Xbox Series X and S in the summer. So we've announced that. Those are our next big things.
Wow.
That's really great. Yeah, the buzz was very positive around Flight Simulator this year. I mean, I listened to a few other podcasts about games, and it was pretty universal in, people being excited about it. And it's pretty neat. Sounds pretty neat. I haven't played a Flight Sim since I worked on, the space flight games that we did together, Tim and I, years and years ago now, because... Well, and then TIE Fighter, I guess, for the series, but that's not really a flight sim. It's a sim, but I don't know if it maps to any actual flight. But kudos. I mean, it's been really warmly received.
It's been on some games of the year lists for sure.
For sure.
And such. Yeah. So well done. Yeah, good. Congrats on your promotion as well. So that's
thank you. Yeah. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Well deserved and overdue, in my opinion. So cool. And good luck with the port to console. I don't understand how, but you actually gave a hint, a really cool, I think, kind of hint to maybe the approach of contextualization of control, which is of course the great way to go, and weirdly connected to Zelda in a way, so that was fun. But
kind of a weird convoluted connection. But it's funny. Anybody I know who's working on porting something to Series X and S or just building for that, we all kind of give each other the same look, which is just oh my god, like. So it's been incredibly challenging, but very rewarding. and just excited about the team. Like we have our development team in Bordeaux, France, and they're just, phenomenal partners and just brilliant. So.
Oh, wow. I hope that when we can all travel again, you get a chance to go visit, because what a great place to be able to visit for your job.
Oh, I know. Yes. When I had started, from the time I started to when, the initial lockdown happened, I was going like every 6 to 8 weeks, and I haven't been there now since. And so that was an incredible challenge, is shipping, at working from home, like us not being able to be there, but also like everybody there and here working from home. So it was just like an added layer of difficulty.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, and with the time difference, something that we've talked about offline, right, is that you mentioned the time difference part of it too, right? So when does your day start, really?
My first meeting is usually at 6 or 7 a.m.
Yeah.
So because they're 9. Is it a 9-hour difference? Yeah. Wow.
That's right.
So
you try to get
ready.
as much overlap as possible.
Yeah. Wow. Shipping during a pandemic. Yeah. Another congratulations. That's crazy.
Thanks.
Yeah. But the interesting cool thing about the flight sim specifically is I've also read some articles where people are mentioning, sort of like having a game like that or an experience like that during the pandemic, because it's so free and you can go anywhere, kind of thing, and you mentioned flying to the top of Everest as I was like, I'm gonna go see what Everest is all about, and that's like it sounds like a very welcome thing for people right now being locked down, those who are appropriate locking down, I guess.
Yeah, you can fly around and see the area around your house, something that I haven't done in almost a year now.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Cool. Well, thank you, Lani. Thanks for being on. It was a pleasure, and I'm glad we did this sort of experimental thing, because I think it definitely paid off, and it was great to hear your side of your perspective on Zelda and your journey there with the series.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
Welcome back from the break. A little production note here. We recorded that 2 weeks ago and are doing our second half feedback part of the cast here the day before it actually comes out. So apologies for making it seem like, oh, hey, welcome back from the break. We're right here. No, yeah, sorry, see you, Lani. No, it's that's not accurate. And sometimes it's not. But yeah, there we have it. It was a good conversation, however. I enjoyed, in particular, hashing out with her, who was which in the Triforce arrangement there at the end.
That was a good question. Yeah, that was a really...
I don't normally do a lot of the questions for the interviewers, because they're often very design-focused and things like that. And, of course, you cover that well. And it also just gets muddled if we both ask a lot of questions. It's hard to keep the through line. So I'm more of a chipping in. But this time I had one. I was like, I want to reserve my one question for the end. So,
and I didn't know it either. I had no idea what to expect at that.
And I didn't make you defend your own choices either.
It was an excellent question, and and I actually really appreciated her answer. To be honest, it was.
I did too. Even if I had a different answer, I very much appreciated her thinking. So it was really interesting to hear how she thought about it. So.
It's the funny thing about that question is I feel like it's also just a good question for some sort of like team building exercise in any company that you were working at, where you're like,
sure. Yeah, I'm sure that there's people at General Motors who really and there's
no, I don't mean that. I mean game.
I know,
but because there is no right answer, but I think it fuels a good conversation and debate, because obviously people will have different perspectives, and I think the answer to that will always change based on who you're talking to. I might have even had, ultimately, if I thought more about it, a different one than you guys.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good.
That's the power of the Triforce. So
exactly, yeah. But yeah, I think I was definitely pleased with the experiment. I hope Lani had a good time. It definitely was, obviously, like we talked about in the recording of it, a little bit weirder approach, but I still think that there's no reason why we can't talk to other developers about these games, even when they haven't worked on them. And she was perfect for Zelda. And I especially liked the music conversation, and to discover and find out that she that she plays this particular soundtrack when she's cleaning the house or whatever, or cooking, or working. And so it's like, that's, that was a nice tidbit. And she had told me the story about Zelda, the first Zelda game, playing as a kid. And I had not heard that when we had worked together before. And so that was actually a really cool story to hear, that I think is very appropriate for this series, as we've talked about, and sort of that concept of representation. And I think that, and you think about a young Lani playing the first game, and it makes complete sense.
Sure.
It's called The Legend of Zelda, and
yep.
That must have been such a weird moment, a really impactful moment, to have that realization that it was Link, like
right,
you said, late
and not to dwell on it, but there's sort of the same problem, but the flipped around with Metroid, right? That you don't know until the end of the game that you've been playing a woman the whole time, and that's just so it's so messed up. It's one of those things we've not. I mean, I could have and have in the past delved into those things, in my blog, or just I used to talk about it on Twitter at times, of like the way gender started skewing to be an issue in games and at one time, and how it paralleled trends specifically in my domain, programming, at the same time. That's really what it went part and parcel with. If you look back at like Atari, original Atari ads, or even original Nintendo ads, NES ads, it's family stuff. I mean, actually Nintendo has always been family focused on their console launch sort of videos. I can remember how much the Wii was about like not seeing the console, but seeing all the people, right? And it's families playing games together, and you're just seeing them play, not seeing the game.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the Switch. I mean, that's the big part of what the Switch is.
Right. True. Yeah. And the Switch
has been. Yeah.
Yep. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lani, for being on.
Thanks again, Lani. It was great to talk to you more about that. And I look forward to murdering things with you again in the future.
You're not going to give any context for that. You're just let it hang.
No, if I give too much context, people will know where to look for the bodies.
Oh boy, yeah. He is referring to a Dungeons and Dragons game that we play together, so I'm going to give you context. But yeah. Yes. And Lani tends to save your life quite a bit. So she does. Critical to your livelihood there.
I have a feeling that there's going to be an ongoing dynamic with me and Lani of, both that, but also just philosophical approaches to things in the game between the characters. So I think it's going to continue to be a fun thing that evolves. So,
for sure.
Anyway.
All right. Well.
Yeah. Let's turn the page to feedback. There were not only was there one that I sadly missed last week. Sometimes Google sorts or Gmail sorts things into the whatever promotions and updates and things like that based on the email address that comes in. Like if it's contact or something like that is the email, then that might be just what that person uses. But Gmail thinks it's promo or whatever. And so even though I'd seen the email in one case, it on my phone, when I actually looked in Gmail, it didn't show up in the inbox. It was somewhere else, and it marked it as read, blah, 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 et cetera. It's not important. The person knows that that's why we didn't read it earlier. We had a couple new short ones as well that I'll read. And we do actually have a new review as well this week through the iTunes store. Why don't you go ahead and get us started by reading that? We appreciate those.
Yes, we do. The subject is Unique Perspective from Mystery Dip. I think one of my favorite things about this is reading people's names. Mystery Dip. There's no space. It's just one word, Mystery Dip. So love it. I hope I get to meet you someday. I started listening to this podcast on my long work road trips, which is perfect as the games covered span multiple episodes. I appreciate the amount of depth Brett and Tim are able to go into due to the pacing of the series and their work experience. They play well off each other, and every episode has been entertaining and insightful. As a hobbyist indie developer, listening to their discussions on mechanics, themes, and tricks has produced a treasure trove of notes that would have taken me years to trial and error to discover on my own. I recommend it wholeheartedly for gamers and developers alike. Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mystery Dip.
Thank you, Mr. E. Dip, if that is your real name.
Yeah. Mr. E. Dip.
Eric Dip. Mystery Dip, as if you're at a party and you're like, what is that? I don't know. Yeah. Is that onion dip? Very, very funny. I like that. I like that name as well. Yeah, we appreciate that very much, and we're glad that we can help you on your longer road trips and things like that. We enjoy going into things in more depth. And actually, I have.
Yeah, the amount of depth we go into sometimes cracks me up. But you know what? As somebody recently told us, it's our podcast, so
that's true. Yeah,
we're gonna do that because I want to.
Oh, so good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with email. This is to devgameclub@gmail.com. This is from Drew. The subject is, it's still weird, though. Hey, Brett and Tim. I think you said at the start of the series, it's pretty creepy that the premise of this game is that a child's mind is magically transferred into their adult body via magical stasis without consent. But I just realized I first played this game when I was somewhere around the age of 12, and I remember at that time thinking how I would love to skip ahead and become an adult without trudging through horrible middle school years. When positioned as a fantasy or wish fulfillment for a kid, maybe it's not quite as gross and weird. I could even imagine the concept originating from one of the designers knowing a kid that wished they could grow up. What are your thoughts on the conundrum of this premise? We might assume this game was designed for kids the age of Child Link. The internet says he was 11. Maybe Nintendo was okay with creepy for an adult, wish fulfillment for a kid. Perhaps by playing as Link, the player gives consent to become the hero of time at any cost. Are you playing Link, or is Link playing you? Good luck, Drew. Yeah, it is still weird though. I agree. Which was his subject. I think it's definitely one of those. Don't think too hard about this. That being a hero is sort of ageless, timeless. And also, to be fair, the game does let him return and continue from his childhood, which is good.
And in the lore, there's complete timelines where that continues.
Oh God.
Yeah, you open the door, I'm going to walk through the door.
I really did not. I did not open the door.
No, you did.
I want to say the door was there somewhere off to the side, and I was like, here, look at this fine coffee table. And you were like, I'm going through that door.
That's enough for me. The door's there. So, and it's unlocked. No, yeah, I mean, I agree. We ironically were just talking about with the previous review, we definitely overanalyze things on purpose. And I completely agree with him. And this concept is not, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there are other games and other stories, obviously many across time.
Sure. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, it would have been things like Freaky Friday. Well, that's the 70s, but and I think there was a remake of Freaky Friday.
You mentioned Big, right?
Big, sure, and also like 18 Again or whatever, that one with the woman from Alias, Jennifer Garner.
Yeah, like
there's millions of these.
Big specifically is one you really can't think too hard about, because if you do, what happens in that movie?
Elizabeth McGovern,
Yeah, Perkins. I think it's Perkins, right?
It's Perkins. Yeah. It's Perkins. You're right.
But yeah, I mean, that's just like, that's some fundamentally whacked stuff going on. But I guess the only thing I'll add, and I totally agree with the subject of the email, is I think what we like, completely innocent intentions from Nintendo. I think it was fantasy fulfillment. I think it is that kind of concept of playing with that. And I think the thing that I would say though is I think the reason we brought it up was I would like to hope that we're all trying to be better in this day and age about thinking about repercussions of our designs and decisions and stories, and so I think in a modern context, I don't think this probably would happen in this way, because I would like to hope that people are thinking a little bit more about that stuff, and I know that's maybe being too generous and people still are not doing it, but I think for us as a podcast, we do want to kind of point things out of like, hey, maybe you should think about this, and we just talked about that in terms of gender as well, right? Like, it's not okay anymore. So like, be responsible, And so, yeah, totally. I think for Ocarina of Time, totally fine. It's, if you think too hard, it's weird, but don't do that. It didn't occur to me. I played the game before. I've gone through that sequence before, and it didn't occur to me then. So, it's ultimately fine. But hey, hopefully we're all learning, and the world is evolving, though it doesn't seem to terribly be evolving.
Not quickly and not necessarily in the right direction. Evolution does not necessarily end well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So sad, but you can hope that we all try to do better. So that's why we pointed it out, but I don't think it's necessarily wrong in this context.
Yeah. As it turns out, last week we're making these remarks, but last week as we're recording, last week was a weird week because I had a little bit of a health problem. We didn't record till Wednesday. After we finished recording, we learned what had been going on in the Capitol. So that's an oblique reference there Tim was making. I think, right. That people may not follow, or probably do. But if you're listening to this 6 months from now, you're like, what are they talking about?
Right. Good point. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. We literally went into recording, not knowing, and they came out and
came out, and it had happened.
Things had all changed. Yeah.
The world was different. Or less different than we'd like it to be. I don't know.
Well, it wasn't different. It just was now more exposed.
Yes, exactly.
It was always there.
Yeah. The only thing I was going to say, I guess, about is there's also sort of the cautionary tale, I think, implicit in that transformation, in that he becomes the adult Link in kind of a blink of an eye, and he's, and the world's a mess, and it's not like just being an adult solves problems, right? So it's also kind of a cautionary tale, I think, to children, which is itself actually not a bad one. That maybe there's
almost
value
like a fable.
Yeah, and going and going through that,
that's good. I think you did mention that actually during the series, and it is a really good point, because you have more responsibilities as an adult. You have to deal with more crap, and
the swords are heavier.
Yeah, the swords are heavier, and the shields are heavier, and people
boots are heavier,
treat you differently, and I think that's, not to keep bringing it back to Breath of the Wild, but it's like they got around this in a different way. They just basically put Link into stasis all the time, or I guess it's kind of implied that maybe I don't know. I guess they're sort of like letting you interpret what's going on. They must have an official answer to this, but you could interpret it that it's the same Link being put into stasis every 100 years, or you could interpret it as they're sort of creating a new Link, like in a clone situation or something. But
so it turns out the backstory of Breath of the Wild is actually Moon. So call up Duncan Jones and see if
oh my goodness.
If you went the other way at the beginning of the game, you'd actually find there's a tunnel where there's just racks and racks of Links. Oh my god, how creepy would that be?
Yeah.
Somebody make that video. I want to see that.
Not only that, but it could be like all of the different Links from the other game.
The Sheikah Stone is voiced by Kevin Spacey, I guess.
Oh my goodness, no, that's even worse. Like, holy cow.
Oh, this is going some dark places. I've got to stop.
Yeah,
oh, man.
you got it. Okay. Well, next mail. What's
you've got the next mail.
Okay. Here we go. Zelda and Running Away from Michael Justice. Hi there. In the first Ocarina of Time episode, Tim mentioned that the animations were impressive because it was made before motion capture was used in games. Well, I know of at least one game that used motion capture at the time, Ocarina
of Time. Yeah.
So if a particular animation looks too good to have been done without mocap, it probably wasn't. If you look closely at Link's feet while standing on slopes or stairs, you'll notice that the game also makes use of inverse kinematics. Kinematics? I thought it was.
Yes.
I thought it was spelled differently this whole time. IK.
Yeah, before you continue, I had forgotten that was true. I had known at one point that they used IK, and I'd forgotten, and I would have brought it up if it had occurred to me.
Yeah.
It's not particularly complicated, IK, because it's
Tomb
only
Raider used it as well.
Yep, Tomb Raider used it as well.
Yeah.
With hand placement, I think, and things, and feet,
and some feet examples, yeah.
So it was being used at the time. It's so for those who don't know, who haven't heard, I mean, inverse kinematics, it basically means if I have a chain of joints that can be posed, right, have some limits and angles and things like that, give me a mathematical solution of like to connect from this point to this other point, how to position those joints. That's all that inverse kinematics
it's
means.
Pretty clever. It's
from the inverse is from the answer, which is I start here and end here, get me the solution, right? That's the inverse. That is what that means. Work backwards, right?
I always put an S in kinematics. I guess I've always just spelled.
You're thinking kinesthetics, which is how cool people look when they're dancing and things like that. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, okay. Brett mentioned that he intends to play Majora's Mask using his GameCube compilation disc, but I would strongly recommend finding any other way to play that game, but be it a better emulator for the original game or the 3DS remake. The GameCube version in particular is prone to crashes, which when combined with Majora's Mask save system can be absolutely catastrophic. Oh, just trust me when I say that if there was ever a game you would never want to have it crash on you, it's Majora's Mask. And now for a completely unrelated tangent to maybe read when you don't have too many on topic emails. One of the most curious behaviors I've witnessed when watching other people play games is when someone is playing an action game but does seemingly everything they can to skip enemies or otherwise avoid combat whenever possible. I'm not talking about speedruns or games that explicitly support nonviolent playstyles, but casual or first playthroughs of games that sell themselves on being all about fighting things. To my mind, this seems like forsaking the journey to get to the destination. Surely the joy of playing a game like Halo comes from fighting aliens, not getting to the end. Question mark? People can play games however they want, but it bothers me when a game inadvertently validates this heretical play style by making it too easy to ignore what is ostensibly the point of the game by just running past it. Particularly when doing things the quote-unquote right way is challenging or takes a long time, it leads to thoughts like, why am I bothering with this when there's nothing stopping me from taking the coward's way out? When I would otherwise have been content to just deal with it without a second thought. Game designers are often aware of this issue, as I've seen many ways of attempting to deal with this, from the heaviest of sticks, the doors lock until you kill everything, to the lightest of carrots, enemies drop currency on defeat, and plenty in between. But I've never heard anyone talk about this issue other than to complain about the solutions, either not understanding or just not caring about the benefits. RPG progression systems are pointless, this is in quotes, manipulative bloat, games are too linear these days, all these complaints, etc. So it seems, it sometimes seems Mike, I'm alone in thinking that if a game doesn't provide sufficient motivation to do what it's supposed to be about, that's a significant strike against the game and a problem that would ideally be dealt with in some way. So which is it? Am I crazy? Or is the world, is it the world that's wrong? Oh, the internet. Is this something you've ever had to actively think about while working on a game? And did you have any changes as a result? I worked on Halo. so yeah, I definitely.
Well, he says, so which is it? Am I crazy or is it the world that's wrong? And I'm going to say those could both be true. So it's
it's both. Well, I mean, this is an age-old game design challenge. And I think to some degree, I've talked about it on every single game I've ever worked on, to be honest. And I think my sort of stock, personally, I'll jump in first, but my stock answer on this is let them play the way they want to play.
Well, he does. To be fair, he does start there. People can play games however they want. I think historically we started out thinking, we were prescriptive, right? Back in the day, we would say no. We would have what we called at LucasArts blood locking. We would lock the doors until everything was killed. Like, no, you have to kill all the enemies to get the hootie-ha. I think another way to deal with this is to remove all the content in the middle, right? Which is like Shadow of the Colossus, right? It's basically what if just the boss battles, right? And stuff like that. But yeah, there's to some degree we don't care as developers.
Yeah, I think what Brett's talking about for both of us to some degree is that I would like to think we've matured to the point where we don't feel compelled to force players to play in a certain way, right? We're going to give them a sandbox. Ideally, even in a linear game, you have some amount of sandbox, and then they can engage with that sandbox the way they want to. The one thing I will add to what I was saying earlier, though, is when talking to the team about this issue and other, especially designers on the team, what I will often get to in this conversation when this comes up and someone says, oh, hey, QA comes back and says, I can just race through this whole level, this whole area and not touch an enemy. And so the debate pops up again, literally like it's like monthly kind of conversation. But what I will often come back to and which I will support his question and kind of point that he gets frustrated about, that Michael gets frustrated about, is that at the end of the day, whatever the game is claiming that it is good at, and in Halo's case, it is the combat, it has to be compelling enough. It should be compelling enough for people to want to do it. And so if they are running and skipping by, maybe they have personal issues of time or there's some other external reason that they are skipping stuff. I'm separating that for a second. But if they're running through because they're bored or they think that the game is bloating or they don't understand the point, then there's a fundamental problem there that needs to be solved. And it's not about bloodlocks. It's not about other things. It's not about the Band-Aids. It's about something's wrong with the combat. Like the combat's not fun enough to keep people playing. To his point, Halo is a great example because it is about the gunplay. Like that's really the whole point. And so
why would you're certainly not going to buy the game for the lore. Oh, I went there.
Okay, yeah, right. You went through the other door. But it should be fun to do, and I totally agree. And so if people are bored with it, then I would push on people to say, like, why is this encounter in Halo's case? Why is this section? Maybe it's too hard, right? Another reason people try to skip stuff is they just keep getting beaten up. And so the difficulty could be wrong. There could be lots of reasons why people are skipping stuff that are on the developers to solve. And it doesn't mean band-aiding like with progression or bloodlocks or rewards. Like those are kind of band-aids in a way. You need your core gameplay loop to be so good if you can get there, because it's very difficult, by the way, to do that. So I'm not saying this like it's easy, but there could be a problem that you need to solve in just the moment-to-moment fundamentals. That could be on the sandbox group. It could be on the encounter level design group. It could be various places. But it's a sign, is what I'm saying. So, but at the end of the day, it's generally should be okay. And again, not to bring up Breath of the Wild again, but I think Breath of the Wild is a good modern example of like, yes, it's an open world game, but you know, the whole concept of being able to go to the castle right away or what have you, you know, they weren't necessarily playing into the speedrun community per se, I bet, but they were giving players, you know, it's like, well, how do you feel about the game? Give you options to react to the game the way that you want. But yeah, it's a good topic. It's going to be a never really completely solved, you know, thing, but I do think it's a sign of something deeper if people are doing it consistently in certain games or certain places in games.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much, yeah, I mean, we've kind of beaten this part of it to death, I guess, but I'm definitely of the, yeah, you know, whatever. You bought the game. Now finding your fun in it is entirely up to you. And I'm like, at that point, happy to have you play however gives you joy. And in fact, if you're not enjoying it, to stop doing the things that make you not enjoy the game. That is a, you know, those are things that I would definitely argue for.
That's why I started to jump into your point right there to add on. That's why free-to-play games are so fascinating to me, because there is no barrier of entry to get in and to get out, right? Because all you've invested is time. Well, initially, right? You could obviously invest down the road, but
also psychologically.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, as far as like the whole, I'm wasting my time kind of, you know, or I've spent the $60, I'm going to, you know, like you were saying, I bought the game, do what you want with it. And the reason I bring in the free-to-play games is going back to that core experience perspective is, you know, I really appreciate free-to-play games that do keep me playing because of the core experience versus the extrinsic, you know, rewards like currencies or progression or, you know, things that don't have. If I just love playing the game fundamentally on its own, like I guess I'll throw out League of Legends as an example, right? Or MOBA, some of the MOBA models were highly successful games, but it's just darn fun to play the game. You know what I mean? And you just kind of get into it, and then you are compelled to maybe spend money after that. But if it's just kind of like, if it's the grind that keeps you coming back, then I say this as a big MMO player, ironically, you know, then I'm less excited and impressed with games that use those tropes versus just focusing on the gameplay. Again, good gameplay is very difficult, so it's not like it's easy to do, but getting one more level is just a statistic, you know. But anyway.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I would also say the other part of it would be, well, it bothers me when I witness others doing it. Stop watching. If it bothers you, stop watching. Don't watch it anymore. You know, I don't know. Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Would be my answer. Yeah. Anyway, I think I think your point about sort of the intrinsic activity being invaluable in of itself, and there being a problem if people don't want to engage in it, is the core insight here. And we have certainly both dealt with those issues in the past on games. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything specific. You know, I will say that the original flight model for Starfighter was far more complicated than it needed to be, and was not anything anybody would have wanted to engage with. And I'm happy that we changed it. So,
well, and it's rooted with the whole age-old problem of like how much time, because games, especially like a Halo game, are so expensive to make. People want to make sure that you're getting, I guess I'll say, you know, the executives and management want to make sure the game is long enough to justify the cost,
the quote unquote value, right?
The value. And so you do, like I believe in Halo 5, we have a couple bloodlocks in place that I wasn't happy about and would push back on, but we never found a better solution or what have you. And so you want to keep people in the level for longer, you know, or whatever, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's coming from that, like, make sure that they play the game for a certain amount of time. And it's not, you know, it's a Band-Aid for that problem. Yeah. Anyway,
All right, I've got
yeah.
our last email pretty short. It's from Sam, who's written before. Recommendation games at school. He says, hello. We don't normally read recommendations, but I thought this one was kind of fun. He says, hello. Hearing you talk about playing games on school computers brought me back. It would be fun to hear you play one of the classic school games, which for me were Math Munchers, Oregon Trail, and Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. Also wanted to plus one the feedback about flexing your format. I think it's a great idea, and I personally don't mind spending a lot of episodes on one game. So I hope you both have a great new year, Sam. I hope you are as well, Sam. So yeah, I'm pleased to announce our 12-episode series on Lemonade Stand. When will we finally get to the bottom of this sweet, sweet economic model, as it were? I was just thinking back. I had mentioned, playing in the computer lab, and I was thinking through some of the games that I had played back in the day. Robot Wars was one, which was like learn how to program 8502 Apple Assembly by programming a robot.
Nice.
Which was a fun one. Trying to think what else we played at the time. There was a lot of games we just coded ourselves. I was still playing a lot of text adventures too at the time. So
yeah, text adventures, Oregon Trail comes to mind. I think that there was an adventure game of some kind. I don't think it was Manhole, but it was something. It was probably earlier. It might have been. What's the Ken Williams, Roberta Williams.
Wizard and the Princess?
Maybe.
Or Mystery House. Mystery House was one, I think.
Yeah, it could have been that. I also remember a couple ASCII games. I don't think they were Rogue, but it could have been Rogue. And then there were a lot of ASCII games back then too.
For sure. Yeah.
That were I got deep into, but I should actually try to figure out which ones they were, but that might be difficult.
Given your memory. One might say
or basically impossible. Yeah, I was very lucky, like I've said, when we played the Sierra games, that I had computers in the home for very early, so I was able to play a lot of stuff at home, so I didn't end up playing at school very much. But Oregon Trail, the good old Oregon Trail,
for sure. All right, well, I think that about does us for this week. We're just closing out that feedback. This is this is it. Final end.
Definitely, we're done.
This is finally the end of our Legend of Zelda series. Thanks so much for sending in those reviews, or that review and those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. You can, of course, find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end. And I wanted to mention that I'm going to start streaming, I guess. I'm very nervous about this process. We're recording this on Tuesday. So you won't be able to benefit from this message because it will be yesterday. But typically, I think I'm going to try Fridays at 7 p.m. As a sort of weekly thing. I'm not going to do it as often as Brett was doing it. And I'm going to focus on the Hitman reboot series for now, and kind of play through that. And then 3's about to come out, so I won't probably finish 1 and 2 before 3 comes out, but I'll move into that. It seems like a fun game to play streaming. So Tim Longo Jr. on Twitch as well, but we'll see how it goes. It could just crash and burn, and I won't do it for very long, but we'll see.
We will see indeed. We can all be virtual guards and watch Tim play. Anyway, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers. Our new logo is by Mark Garcia. Have fun manipulating lemonade prices this week, and good night.
Good night.